this episode of Let's Talk, Let's Think. I am your host, Carrie Braggs, and I'm glad you could join me today because we are finally going to take care of the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn in Egypt. And so, as we've seen in the other videos that they God unleashed all these different plagues, and Pharaoh still refused to let the people go. But as I pointed out in one of the earlier videos, that he knew God was in control because he always sent for Moses to ask him to pray to God for these things to stop. So we've just seen different changes throughout the plagues to where first the magicians, they were doing some of the same things, but then after I think like about the third plague, they couldn't reproduce anything, and then it went on to where God was showing distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites, because those in Egypt were the only ones suffering from the plagues. And then we've seen Pharaoh. He continued to harden his heart, but then he started saying, hey, I and my people have sinned against God, and please forgive me, and ask him to call off the plague. And so we've just seen different things go on. And so we left off with plague 9, with the darkness. And so now we pick up in chapter 11 verse 1, where God told Moses there would be one more plague, and then Pharaoh would let the people go. Not only let them go, but drive them out as well. So that's that's very interesting. As we see throughout all of this, he's refusing to let them go, and now he's going to let them go, and he's going to also drive them out. And so, to me, I just want to point out a few things that are important within this. So now, as these things go on, God is preparing the children of Israel for them to exit. So now he's preparing them, because before now they didn't know how this was going to go. They were just sitting up watching God at work, watching him issue out plagues against the Egyptians, and they sat by and they watched these things taking place. And so they didn't know what to think or how this was going to go, because God was communicating with Moses, and then Moses would come communicate. And so throughout all of this, Moses has been back and forth with Pharaoh. And so they don't know what's going to happen. So now we shift gears here to where God is talking to the Israelites, and he's going to give them information on what they need to do. And so he started preparing the people to leave. So he told the people before they leave Egypt to go ask their neighbors for silver and gold. And so they've gone through all of these plagues, and now the people are sitting up, and it's like, I know the Israelites are ready for them. The Egyptians are ready for them to go. And so on top of that, then they come and say, excuse me, could you please spare a little silver and gold? And so you just think about that. They're at the point now where they're like, I really don't care. Take it all. Take it all. You just go. Just get away from me. And so it says they went to their neighbors and got silver and gold. And so in verse 4, God said he was going into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn would die, from Pharaoh to the slave girl to the cattle, and there will be a cry in Egypt never before seen, and never will be seen again. And so this is the preparation as things go. So he told Moses how this is going to go. So he's going to kill the firstborn of Pharaoh, the slave girl, down to the cattle, to really just show that he is in control. And then in verse 7 it says, while this is happening, all will be well with the Israelites. So that distinction is there again. So for those who don't believe, to say, hey, this is only happening over there, not over here. This is not possible. And so he's preparing them for the Exodus. And so he starts telling Moses how things are going to be before they are allowed, before he allows the destroyer to smite the Egyptians, the angel of death coming through, or as he said, he was going to come through. So this is God coming through, killing the firstborn. And so says there to get a lamb or a goat without spot or blemish. Then on the 14th day of the month, that they will kill the lamb at twilight. Then they are to put the blood over the doorposts of the house. And then it says, next they will eat the lamb with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And so, once again, they don't have time to be seasoning food and just like this is a regular dinner. He's preparing them to get going. He's preparing them to do this quickly and get going. And so also it says, when you eat, have on your sandals with your staff in your hand and eat in haste. So he's letting it be known, hey, once I strike down the firstborn, it's going to be a cry in all of the land in Egypt. So they're going to be dealing with death. And so this is not the time for you to be trying to get your things together, because at that point in time, they're going to want you gone. But if you're still there after a few minutes packing bags and doing all these other things, then they're going to turn on you and they're going to like, you know what? Forget this. It's their fault that this is going on. Let's go get them. Now they are going to do that later after they go and they're at the Red Sea. See, after a while they changed their minds and they thought about it and they're like, let's go get them. And so God is having them prepare ahead of time, say, hey, you need to get your stuff together. Right now you need to be eating, eating your food and on the run. You need to be ready. So when I say go, it's time to go. And so that's how God had it set up. And so a thing that I also found interesting within this, in verse 12, God says he will strike down the firstborn of man, beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And so look at that. He's getting everybody. He's like, hey, man, beast, and also your gods. I'm coming after everybody, because remember, you all are praying to these gods and acting as though they are competition to me, or acting as though they are a true God, or that they even exist, or any of these things. So I'm going to show you, none of your gods that you are worshiping can save you. I'm coming after you and them. And what are you going to do about it? And as we see, there was nothing that could be done about it. And so God told Moses all these things are going to take place. And so in chapter 12, verse 21, that is when Moses actually went and told everybody, hey, this is what's going on. This is how we're going to do things. And he commanded them to follow all of his directions. And also, even in verse 22, at the end of verse 22, and when he said, once you put the blood over the doorpost, and then he said, and none of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. So it's letting it be known you need to stay inside. So it's very important, down to the last detail, that they follow directions, that they follow instructions. And that's the same thing with us, that we need to be knowing what God's instructions are and his directions are. We need to be following them right down to the letter, to the last detail. And so he told them so Moses told them all the things to do, and then he also told them that once they get in a new land and the kids ask them why they're observing this rite, they are supposed to tell them what happened with the Exodus, so that can be passed down from generation to generation. And so to close everything up with this last plague and how everything played out. So everything started to take place in verse 29, and so I'll read that. It says, "Now it came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle." Verse 30. "Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead." Verse 31. "Then he called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, Rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go, worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you said, and go." And so now it is done, it is finished, so to speak. They have gone through all these plagues, and now it took the death of his firstborn son to acknowledge God was in charge, and for him to let him go. Let the Moses and the Israelites go. And so kind of ask yourself, when we look back at this and look at the fact that God is in control and how we continue to do all of these different things and we suffer for it. So as you see, the Egyptians and Pharaoh suffered for continuing to act as though they were in control, to not acknowledge God was in control and that he was the one who had all the power. They refused to acknowledge those things, and even though they wouldn't acknowledge that he was in control, he still showed he was in control. So it's like, whether you acknowledge it or not, you will see God is in control. You'll see it. You can't deny it. But the thing of it is, will you suffer because you continue to act as though he's not in control? Or will you surrender and allow him to pass over your house with the plague? That's the question I think we need to ask ourselves. And so I would like to close us out on this point here. Back in chapter 10, when the plagues of the locusts came forth, he had told Moses to take the men only. When Moses had told him, we taking all the people, we taking the flocks and the herds, and he was like, no, you're not taking all of that. You can just take the men and go. And he drove them out from his presence. And now it goes from you can't go, no one can go. And now it's turned into take you, take your flocks, your herds, and everybody and go. But then there's one more part at the end of verse 32 that I left out. And after he said all that, and he told them, take both your flocks, your herds, and as you have said, and go. And then he said, and bless me also. So that's interesting to me. He went through all of these plagues. Egypt is ruined now. His son is dead. And in the end, God still showed he was in control, didn't he? He didn't have to suffer through all of those things. Egypt did not have to be ruined. He did not have to lose his firstborn son. But he put himself through this suffering. I'd just like to ask you at this time, when you putting yourself through some suffering because you are living in sin, you're living some sinful lifestyle, and you have hardened your heart, and you won't acknowledge what you're doing, and God will not give you any peace in living that life and living in that sin, and you just continue to suffer because of your pride. So, you're the only one who can answer that question. We can only answer those questions for ourselves. But as you see, no matter what we are doing, no matter how we are living, no matter how it may go, God always continues to show that He is in control. And as we saw here, Pharaoh thought he was in control, but God showed him different. And so I pray at this time, as we go through all these different things, that we understand that man is not in control right now, but God was in control before this happened. God is in control now that it's happening. And guess what? God will be in control after it happens. But the question is, do you believe that? Do you acknowledge that? And do you live as though God sits on the throne? So I'm going to leave that right there. I thank you for joining me for the 10 plagues and looking at how things kind of match up with what we have going on with this coronavirus. And hopefully you can see the parallel to that. But remember that God is in control, and just, don't be distracted by all of these other things. I think we need to be focused on strengthening our relationship with God and growing spiritually, and that will ultimately help us deal with what's going on in the right manner. So also, if you are this is your first time tuning in to Let's Talk, Let's Think, thank you for joining us. I ask that you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Therefore, you will get all the videos when they first come out, and you can become a part of our group. And as I continue to put videos out, you will be there receiving all of the teaching, and hopefully it will help give you understanding of the Bible and help you grow spiritually. So that's it for today on Let's Talk, Let's Think. I'm your host, Carrie Braggs. So I will see you later this week. God bless.